So we're going to be talking about the play The Road to Mecca by Athol Fugard. And let's start by talking about how we came across it and what we knew going in. Do you want to go?
Well, you introduced us to the play, I guess. And I went in knowing nothing about the play. We didn't even read the what's the word for it?
The note.
Yeah, the notes. We didn't even read that. So we kind of so we went in not knowing anything about the author or about the characters and what was going to happen, not knowing when it was set. So we just kind of looked at the play just by itself without much context. And we had a very different, I guess, realization or a feeling about the play after we finished reading it versus when we then went and researched about it. And we were like, whoa, we weren't expecting these two completely different feelings.
It completely changed my perspective going back. But I guess we'll talk about that in a bit. First, do you want to say what you first noticed when you were reading the play?
It was always apparent that Helen was sort of like hiding something, but she really came across as like, you know, just a grandma that you just really would love and want to care for, who's perhaps a bit lonely, and you kind of want to just look after them because you feel really sad for them, and she's just trying to get by. You know, she just came across as this very I mean, I'm not saying she's not sweet and lovely, that's not what I'm saying, but she came across as this warm presence, you know. And Elsa at the beginning for me came across as this like really sarky, a bit like immoral, a bit slightly is edgy the word, you know, kind of character, you know. And I didn't really know like why they were friends or what was going on there. But the more we read the play, the more we realized how many layers there are to Elsa's character, as we were saying when we were reading it. And we begin to realize the kind of support they give to each other. And it's not like the most obvious thing. I think anyone would just be like, why are they friends? And we begin to see why they support each other, and they kind of rely on each other for a lot of things, you know?
Yeah. I think I had a very strong kind of idea of where I thought the characters were going, and they very quickly, with every revelation that came out throughout the play, kind of tore that notion to pieces. And I kept thinking, okay, so now it's going to go in this direction. No, now it was very jarring at first because I was so much thinking, like you said, so Helen comes across as this sweet kind of nurturing lady who you think is going to be there for Elsa, and Elsa, and you can see that something's about to come out. She's near the end of her tether, but I thought it would be that she was brokenhearted and kind of that would be the end of it. But no, there are, like you said, so many layers as this play gets more and more complex. And I think that it was brilliantly done, the way he created these characters in very complex circumstances. So Helen's at the age where she's starting to think about, you know, if she can live on her own, if she needs to go into assisted living, you know, if she has to give up her independence to kind of increase her safety, and that's a very complicated position to be in life. Elsa is kind of on the other end of the spectrum, thinking, you know, I want to start a career, but how do I do that, stay true to my principles? And
Fugard tackled various important themes in The Road to Mecca. His work was a discourse of life in a small South African village. His work asked broader existential questions about why humans are compelled to make art and what is art's purpose. His work questioned the value of organized religion and other ways humanity could experience spiritual fulfillment, such as through art. He presented very non-judgmentally and empathetically important female issues such as abortion and traditional roles of women in this community. He explored important issues of how we view and treat the elderly. His ability to weave so many pertinent themes into one story was exceptional. The piece explored important issues, but was predominantly about the characters. This choice to make the work about the individuals and not the issues gave the work a greater emotional resonance.
Yeah, I mean, that really sums up how I felt about it. I think that put it beautifully, and it's kind of, that's where I was heading, was they're going through complex situations in their lives. They're also deeply complex people. They deal with those situations in ways that are not great but not horrible, or they're very it's, even though they make mistakes, and they're probably going to continue to make those mistakes,
They
very much feel like you want to be a part of that support that they give to each other, because they're so real as characters. And I think, yeah, he did that exceptionally.
Yeah. The reason I think why I found this play so engaging, well, because he focuses on the characters and he puts all these layers into the character, and he sort of brings out all these issues through the characters without it being sort of like he's trying to give you a lecture about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that expresses beautifully what I was trying to say, where they have these they're in these complex phases of their life, but also they're extremely complex individuals. The way they deal with things, the kind of issues they have, they're definitely not presented as all good or all bad. They're extremely three-dimensional as characters. And I think that was because essentially what we're reading is an entire play with two characters and then one third very minor part. So the fact that he was able to create such real characters with such depth really held my attention and made me care a lot more than I might otherwise have cared. And I think he did that incredibly impressively.
You know what's interesting is these characters seem really real, and but if you look at the way it's been written, when we were reading out loud to each other, there were pages and pages of monologues, and in real life people don't talk like that. So isn't it interesting that it was like pages and pages long, and it wasn't necessarily like colloquial in the way we would talk as when me and you talk, and it seemed like it would be like a long lecture about something, but it didn't. It somehow worked.
I really like that you pointed that out, because I didn't notice that, explicitly, but I guess I felt like they were two people who had so much on their mind in this very short window of time together, that they were just getting things off their chest, they both had to keep just letting it pour out. That's how it came across in the play. And again, as you said, you've got two people kind of having monologue after monologue after monologue. You could very easily switch off, but it was written so carefully that you really didn't. What part did you feel touched you the most emotionally?
I think, even though I was reading Elsa, right, I think it was the part where Helen was talking about her making that decision to not go to church that day. I think that part stuck with me the most. And it's kind of like we I think that moment when she's describing it, and perhaps it was the way you're reading it, or maybe the way he's written it, it was like she's finally like coming to this like realization, and this freedom that Fugard is kind of like really trying to push through with his play, right? But then it's kind of like, let me say this properly, I think that moment really kind of showed us how she feels about the freedom. Like, we really see that she really longs for that freedom, and then immediately we hear her sort of like trying to justify it, or then we hear the reasons why maybe something didn't work. It's kind of like we see Helen at her purest, when she talks about that. I think I really, really like that. And I think it's kind of like what it's like the freedom that Fugard is talking about, you know, in his play. I think it's that. And, you know, we see Helen have it. And we see Helen have that independence in that moment.
And we see Elsa strive for it.
Yeah, and we see exactly, it's that moment that they're, and then she does make that decision. But then you see, as soon as she says it, we then see bam, 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 more reasons pile up as to why perhaps it was the wrong decision. Why society says you shouldn't have done that. Why you should have gone to church that day, and so on, you know? And it's like, it's like a glimpse of like that hope that I think we're seeing. For wasting precious time, you wrote it, posted it, and I received it.
So can't we now please just forget it?
Miss Helen, do you remember what you said in it?
Vaguely.
That's not good enough.
What are you going to do?
Read it.
No, I don't want to hear it.
You already have, Miss Helen. You wrote it.
But I don't want to talk about it.
Yes, you must.
Don't bully me, Elsa. No, I don't know how to fight back. Please, not tonight, can't we?
No, we can't. For God's sake, Helen. We've only got tonight and maybe a little of tomorrow to talk.
You mustn't take it seriously.
Too late, Helen. I already have. I've driven 800 miles without a break because of this. And don't lie to me. You meant every word of it. I'm not trying to punish you for writing it. I've come because I want to try and help. Fugard, when he did this play, it was done very sort of like a bare, like just bare necessities with the play, you know, very, very small cast, and it's all done in just one room, you know, where like just a few furnitures, and it's all happens in a period of one night, right? They were highlighting quite a lot of issues, right, to do with class, racism, and a lot of like trouble, day-to-day troubles in the lives of these local people. But that doesn't necessarily get through to the audience because there is like there's that gap of them not being people who are subjected to these issues in their lives.
He keeps it very simple so that these like ideas of freedom and are very accessible. He doesn't overcomplicate the simple message he wants to get across with too many kind of lights and noises and changes. He doesn't want to, you know, make the language too flowery or the ideas too complex. He just wants this like simple but incredibly important message to come through about freedom.
Yeah. And also it's having Marius's character and Elsa's character there, and they're both like the two you know, the people on your shoulders, you know, they're basically two people there. One's like the more conservative and one's like the more liberal person, you know, and it's kind of like without it being like a political discourse on like, oh, this is how we should be living. It's kind of like with those two characters and just with speech, he presents so many ideas and he's constantly swinging us like in this way, you know, without needing anything more, just with their speech. And I think this is why this was such an engaging play, despite having those like really long monologues, which normally would turn someone off, you know. It kind of like with every time one person spoke, you'd be like, oh yeah, you know, and then oh yeah, and then, you know, I think that's what really did it. It was like it didn't need anything else because so many things were being unfolded with just the words, was my point. Yeah.
And I think this brings us really nicely onto how context changed our perspective, because I expect most of the people going to this play were a lot less ignorant about the issues than I was. Probably would have been aware of most of this, but So I kind of, before reading about it, I knew vaguely about the apartheid and kind of some of the like deep social issues that were, South Africa was facing at the time. I didn't know until after we'd read it that the 70s was a particular decade of social disruption. There was kind of a huge rise in trade unions and strikes. Kind of a strike culture emerged where people would actually take a stand and stop working in order to try and improve their the conditions that they were working in and living in. And I think Elsa mentions this a little bit, or she alludes to it at least, that there's kind of political issues going on in the education system, and she's trying to get her students to be more open about and engage with them a bit more. And she's really facing backlash from the authoritative figures that she has to deal with as a teacher. And but it also adds a dimension to the story, because you think in South Africa at that very time that this play was set, there's this huge talk about freedom and what people are prepared to put up with, and what kind of rights they should have, and what kind of care they should have access to, and how they're going to start to try and control that a little bit more, rather than depending on the people in charge to give that to them. And there's a strong parallel between that larger picture and then this very kind of this story in very limited parameters, where it's one woman kind of saying, actually, I'm not going to go to church on Sunday. I'm going to spend it creating art because that's what I want to do. And, the church or the people with authority kind of turning her into a bit of a pariah, kind of not allowing her to be a part of their society, be integrated with them if she's not prepared to live by their rules and their values. And her kind of fighting against this, saying, actually, no, I'm not going to keep going to church. I'm going to stop going to church. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that's how I'm going to live my life. I think that knowing that that's that whole backdrop, like kind of with the strikes happening at the same time, I think it's very clever how he took that huge national issue and kind of condensed it into the story of one woman, so that we could really empathize with it as an audience.
There's this part in here just before the introduction. I forget what this part is called. There's a name for it, but it says it's by Emily Dickinson. And I think it's really interesting that he chose to write this. It says, "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door on her divine majority, present no more." And it's kind of like the soul selects her own society. It's like him narrowing everything down to Helen, and Elsa and Marius, who present the different aspects of the society at that time. I don't know, I think it's like the soul selects her own society. I think that captures so well Helen, and it's like her choosing her own sort of freedom, and then it's kind of like Elsa trying to do the same, but being young and being sort of like, I guess, let down by people or by society. It's kind of like, it's like, how can she choose her own society? Because for society, for you to be in a society, you need other people with you. Do you know what I mean? It's like, you as a soul cannot be your own society, which Helen has tried to do by making her society her art, and she's found that sort of contentment in that. But for others, it's such a struggle, because you as a one person is not society. And you see that struggle with Elsa. And in some way, do you think Marius too? Because it's like I feel like he wants something, you know, but he's so sort of in his society that he has chosen that he cannot like come out of it, if that makes sense.
See, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure I completely agree. I saw it differently. I think Marius, as you know, we forgot what the role is called, but he's a religious figure with some authority that people look up to and respect and listen to. He's a big part of creating that society, and that's how he likes it. And what he really wants is for Helen to want him and that society. He wants to be chosen by her. He doesn't want her, he wants her to choose him. And the fact that she's not prepared to, that she's choosing herself, is, I think, something that he can't get over. He cannot let his ego go enough to realize that actually Helen would be miserable with him going to church, you know, and he would equally be miserable with her being an outcast and not having that figure where not being that figure where he's respected and people come up to him, people look to him to make their decisions in their daily lives. And so I think actually he very much wants to be in that society, wants to create that society or be a part of creating it, but can't bear the fact that someone else wouldn't choose it and wouldn't choose him.
Yeah.
But talking about how Helen is very much this kind of symbol of choosing freedom and choosing hope is very, I mean, I don't want to say controversial because that's not the right word. It's odd, and it didn't seem odd when we were reading it, but when we looked into it afterwards and I found out she was a real person, I learned more about her story. My perspective on the whole thing became, well, I saw it in a much more sinister way. It felt very eerie and sinister once I learned her real story, because throughout the play we're always on Helen's side. I was always on Helen's side. I thought, go on, Marius, we don't need you here. Let her get on with her own thing. She doesn't need to be taken away and put in a home. She's not crazy. She's just different. She just likes art. She's just not going to pretend to be like everyone else. It was very much, and as such, completely behind Elsa, who was supporting that idea and supporting her and saying, you don't need those people. You're independent. You're self-reliant. You'll find the way you are. And then I learnt that she was a real person who really did create this art, and she had been through some horrible things in the play. She's a widow. In real life she was divorced from a husband who I think was probably quite abusive, and he had a couple of forced abortions, so she did go through some very difficult things in her life.
She had a very difficult time with her family as well. And her dad especially.
So then she divorced, kind of went off on her own and started creating this art. But she really she wasn't taking care of herself by the end. It wasn't this kind of thing of, well, she's just different, but she's completely self-sufficient and she's okay. She was harming herself. In the play, it mentions that her eyesight's getting a bit worse. It seems like an innocent side effect of old age. She was actually throwing little bits of cut glass into the ceiling, and that was harming her eyesight. It would fall in her eyes. I mean, that's not someone who's taken care of themselves. And then she did eventually commit suicide. And knowing that, you completely think Marius was trying to care for her. He and the town could see that she wasn't okay. It wasn't just a case of she's different and we don't like it. It was, she's actually lost the perspective required to care for herself and her own health. And it makes you think Elsa is the person she's closest to, and cares enough about her that she just drove 30 hours or whatever it was to be with her for one night because she thought she wasn't doing very well. And yet Elsa is supporting this idea of her staying independent. Does she not realize, or does she not care, or is she so does she so much need Helen to be that figure of freedom for her that she can't bear the thought of Helen giving that freedom up, because that's who she clings on to when she's trying to figure out, if she should pursue her own path and go against the kind of the government and her bosses and everyone or not. And it kind of gave me this weird conspiracy theory, which I've already disproved to myself, because Marius does talk to Helen, and also Helen was very lightly based on a real friend. Not Helen, Elsa was very lightly based on a real friend, younger friend that the real Helen did have. But it kind of made me think that Elsa is like this kind of little figment of Helen's imagination that represents her when she was at that turning point in her like maybe mid to late 30s when her husband died in the play, and she kind of thought, well, I could go along with society, or I could forge my own path. I could choose freedom over safety and comfort. Because Helen is at that stage, and she's going through a separation that deeply hurts her with someone who didn't treat her with a lot of respect. He was married, he was having an affair, he made promises to her that he didn't keep, much like the real Helen situation. And she, like you said, she's that little voice in Helen's shoulder saying, you don't have to listen to Marius, you don't have to go and give this up, you don't have to be in a home, you don't need anyone taking care of you, you can continue doing what you're doing. It felt like, I think actually it would have been much more eerie and sinister if she'd never had any interactions with Marius, so that we weren't ever sure. Although obviously that's not what they were going through for, so that they wouldn't have done that. But I felt like, and even just like in the play, obviously we weren't watching it, we were reading it, and you learn that Helen's like always been afraid of the dark, and it was part of her trauma as a child. And so she's created this place that's full of light, and you imagine something enchanting, something magical, something with warm candlelight flickering around that comforts you, give you a sense of hope instead of fear. I looked at images of her real house, which is, you can now go and visit. It's
Owl House
now, Owl House. And then out of curiosity, I went and looked at the stage settings, and they did mirror Owl House, and it's very sinister and eerie. She has red windows that kind of leads everything with like dark red tinge. Same, she has like green windows that do the same. It's not beautiful, it's
eerie.
Eerie, it's sinister, it's tense, it looks like something out of a horror film, like a very artistic horror film. And you just think someone who's in that environment all the time, because she didn't leave, she was there for years, adding to it, kind of refining it, getting it to that state. It doesn't feel like freedom being in that kind of, I imagine that being in those rooms that are dark, where everything's tinged with red or dark green, feels like you're in a very tight, small, scary space. It doesn't feel like you're in this beautiful, enchanted, like magical land. So it definitely confuses me now thinking back. Like, is she supposed to be this beacon of hope and light, or are we supposed to take from it that actually freedom, if you're on your own and you don't have society with you, is a very dangerous and scary thing, and in order to be safe you need to have everyone kind of moving together forward as society? I'm not sure. I don't know what to take away from it. What do you think, Rishma?
I think the second of what you said is, I keep going back to that thing written in the beginning, the soul chooses their own society. And I think it would have been really sad if Marius actually succeeded in taking her to a care home, like for the elderly, because I think For us, yes, you know, like the red and the green tinge seems eerie. But for Helen, that was her Mecca. You know, that is where she feels safe and what's it called? She feels the warmth, even if we don't feel it, right? And I think like this about the glass in her eyes and so on. I think the kind of like the trauma that she was going through was obviously linked to her past and the way people had treated her and let her down, right? But also because society kept letting her down. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, people teasing her, calling her the witch. So yes, I will embrace this red light. I will embrace this green light.
Yeah,
you know.
it's actually kind of a good point, because it's very clear that the real woman, she was prepared to do anything to let her art come out, be that sacrifice kind of her place in society, sacrifice her own health, because she basically blinded herself.
Mm-hmm.
And then when she realized she wasn't going to be able to create anymore, she killed herself. I mean, she didn't want a life without it.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I think by the end it was obviously the only thing that had any meaning to her.
Yeah.
But that, you know, it's quite a sad existence in a way.
Yeah.
It's definitely not just this kind of beacon that we should all strive to be like.
I think
one of the people who kind of paves the way, but she has to do it to a certain extreme, otherwise she'd never get there, because no one's created that path yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, then people can hopefully start to follow her, but not as extreme.
Mm-hmm. I think you said it very briefly, and I think you put it quite well. Is I think once you realize the context of it all, right, and then you read, and yes, there is that bit of confusion, but I think ultimately it is about kind of portraying the message of like, this is how dark it can get, you know, when you leave them on your own, almost, you know, when we don't accept them for who they are and how they are. Because imagine if people had just accepted Helen as who she was when she was just beginning to do her art. You know, what if she was not sort of like portrayed as like pariah when she decided not to go to church, you know, and she was able to create a society with actual people there, not just one person who came to visit her ever so often, you know. It's like, I don't think Helen would have gone to that dark place, but she didn't have anyone, so she had to, you know, she like really let the art consume her. And once you realize that this is what I want, this is the freedom I want, and not that life, it's like there's just no going back. And if people are on board with it, then it can be a really beautiful thing that we can experience all together, or it can be this dark, gloomy place where you don't even mind if glass is falling in your eyes, because this is my world. I will do anything for it. And if I can't do it anymore, I'll die. And I don't care, because I've fulfilled what I want. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think what you said about Elsa, not Elsa, about this kind of message that it's the idea of freedom, you getting to that freedom is a lonely world, you know. I think we see that with Elsa's character as well. We see that she strives for all of these things, but it's kind of like she's kind of knows she's gonna end up lonely, kind of thing. Do you think that? Like, I think we talked about it briefly when we were reading it a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think with like she's going through this whole like mental shift where, you know, love is not enough, you have to trust someone, right? I think for her, freedom, and you know, freedom of speech, freedom of protest, all these different types of freedom, and then obviously the greater freedom that comes once you've done a successful protest or made a successful case to, you know, have more freedom in society for everyone. Like, this is increased general freedom. I think she's realizing that people who love her but who don't kind of agree with her cause, that she can't rely on to be there by her side, are not going to stay by her side, because it's such a drastic path at that time in that place. So I think, yeah, she probably is quite scared that she's headed for loneliness in the same way that Helen is. But I think also she's, throughout the play, and also just before the play, like when she was on the drive up, she's obviously been doing a lot of thinking in her life and a lot of reevaluating. I think she's coming to the conclusion that she needs to, like Helen, kind of forge her own path, be her own person, and not cater to anyone else. Maybe that is why she doesn't say, listen, Helen, because she is worried about Helen. She's very worried about her and her kind of suicidal thoughts. But she doesn't say, you need someone to be with you, you need some kind of medical help. Well, she does say go get an eye test, but it's not a very extensive visit. She doesn't say try therapy. Maybe it is because she just needs that one person to be her guide and to follow her, and to know that, you know, she's not completely on her own and she's the only person doing this. And if Helen goes into that care home, she will be.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a depressing note to end it on.
Yeah.
But it was beautifully put together.
I agree.
Yeah, it was very moving. And for me, it had the added bonus of knowing that it meant a lot personally to my grandmother, and I could read it with her in mind, thinking, you know, this is actually, I could tell which parts of her own life allowed her to relate so heavily to the play, and that was really nice. I think there's only one thing left to do, and that is we just need to watch the play.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah. I would really like
watch
to.
the play. Yeah.
I'm really interested because so I contacted my South African friend, and then she said that they read it in school as well. I wonder like what kind of discussions they have, and you know, like what other things maybe we've missed. I'd be really interested.
Yeah, tell her to put them in the comments.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, you know the story of the woman who's doing that walk that Elsa encounters? That is actually a really famous South African story. It's like
fictional
I think it's like a folklore type of thing, you know, like they know about that woman, and I think in the end she like leaves her baby or something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's the kind of context that also, like, I imagine a lot of people have when they're, because I imagine a lot of people who have read it and watched it have, that we did not. It just went over our heads.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting seeing what the play does when it's just speaking for itself and you don't have that extra context, because it still moved us.
Yeah, exactly. In different ways, but it definitely did.
It's not the kind of thing I normally read, but I'm definitely glad I did.
Yeah. We didn't talk about art.
You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
Pretty scary as well, like all her owls, her people. Apparently,
yeah, no wonder like people were a bit kind of like spooked out. I would be as well, a little bit. You know, there's like what are those things, gnomes that people have in their like front. I'm freaked out by that already. So you can.
Also, they're so large. They're kind of larger than life, aren't they? Had statues and they have these kind of like empty eyes, if I can remember correctly. And yeah, very, very. It's so. Well, it's just like unfathomable to me that that's what she chose to bring her comfort. Because there's so many people, myself included, that would make me incredibly tense being in that environment. Especially alone.
But you see, the society that is outside of her house is more of is an even scarier thought for her. You know.
Yeah.
The people, especially the people that she had to encounter, the abuse. It's like this is like fantasy. It's like amazing, you know.
I think even just the fact that they're made from cement. I mean, wood and stone are these kind of beautiful natural materials, and cement is so harsh and I can't even think of the word, but I'm having all these like
brutal,
huge cement people in your garden is very eerie. I've just said eerie too many times.
Yeah.
But, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was saying it's ironic now that the very art that made her such a pariah in the town is now the sole reason tourists go there. Maybe so it's the main reason people flock to that little village is to see it now. So I don't know, came to something. She definitely spoke to people with it, or she speaks to them now with it. I wonder if she would have been happy about that, or if she wouldn't have cared, or if she would have been a bit upset by it.
I think everyone wants some kind of acceptance, you know. So I can't imagine her not being happy. But
she was very happy that Elsa liked it, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Like she was thrilled that Elsa came and appreciated it instead of turning away from it. So yeah, she probably would have loved it.
Did you read about that thing where it said she painted her dad's room black and was like, "This is a lion's den." If I'm
she put the lion's den. I think while he was still in it,
alive and in it, like imagine that. That's so.
What a good revenge though.
Like friggin' hell, that's so intense. And like that already tells you, you know, like something is like not right here, like a little bit, you know, like something has been like she's like traumatized in some way, you know.
Put you in the darkness now.
Yeah.